The cranberry sauce was still warm when my mother looked directly at me across our Thanksgiving table and said the words that would shatter everything I thought I knew about my family. I had just pulled into the driveway of my childhood home in suburban Chicago carrying a bottle of expensive wine and the homemade pumpkin cheesecake I spent 3 hours perfecting the night before. I was practically buzzing with excitement about sharing my promotion news with everyone. But as we gathered around the dining room table where I had eaten thousands of meals growing up, my mother, Margaret, suddenly interrupted my father's traditional grace with a voice full of venom I had never heard before. "Paula, I think it's time someone finally said what we've all been thinking." My mother announced her words slightly slurred as she reached for her third glass of wine before we had even started eating. The room fell silent except for the gentle bubbling of the green bean casserole. My father, Robert, stopped mid-prayer, his weathered hands still folded, but his eyes wide with confusion. My siblings, Sarah and David, exchanged glances that seemed loaded with meaning I could not decode. "What are you talking about, Mom?" I asked, setting down my fork and feeling my stomach twist into knots. The excitement I had carried through the door just minutes earlier was rapidly dissolving into something cold and uncomfortable. "You come here every holiday with your hands out like some charity case." Margaret continued, her voice growing louder and more aggressive. "It's pathetic, Paula. You're 28 years old. Stop relying on the family and learn to stand on your own 2 feet for once." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at my mother, searching her face for some sign that this was a cruel joke or a misunderstanding. But her expression was hard and determined, her lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. Around the table, my family members seemed frozen in place like mannequins in a department store window. "Mom, I came here to tell everyone about my promotion," I said slowly, my voice barely above a whisper. "I got promoted to senior financial analyst at Morrison & Associates. I'm making $85,000 a year now." "Oh, here we go with the bragging," Margaret scoffed, taking another large sip of wine. "Always showing off, always thinking you're better than the rest of us. But we know the truth, don't we? We know how many times you've come crawling back here when things got tough." I felt my face burning with humiliation and confusion. What was she talking about? When had I ever asked my family for money? In fact, the more I thought about it, the more I realized the exact opposite was true. Just last month, I had quietly transferred $800 to help cover my mother's car repair after she mentioned the transmission was failing. Before that, I had paid David's emergency room bill when he slipped on ice and dislocated his shoulder. The bill was $5,800 that his insurance refused to cover due to some technicality with his policy. "Margaret, maybe we should discuss this privately," my father said weakly, his voice trembling slightly. He looked older than his 62 years, his hair completely gray now and his shoulders stooped with what seemed like the weight of secrets. "No, Robert, I'm tired of tiptoeing around this," Margaret snapped back at him. "Paula needs to hear this. We've been enablers for too long and look what it's gotten us. She shows up here acting like she owns the place, expecting us to fawn over her latest accomplishment while she continues to take advantage of our generosity." I felt tears stinging my eyes as I looked around the table at my family. Sarah, my 30-year-old sister, was staring intently at her plate of untouched food. David, who was 25 and had always been my closest sibling, was fidgeting with his napkin and avoiding eye contact. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. "When have I ever taken advantage of you?" I asked, my voice shaking despite my efforts to stay calm. "When have I ever asked any of you for money?" "Don't act like you don't remember," Margaret said with a bitter laugh. "The car payments, the credit card bills, the rent money. We've bailed you out so many times I've lost count." I felt like I was living in an alternate universe where up was down and black was white. The car payments she was referring to had been my payments on her vehicle loan after she fell behind due to her reduced work hours at the department store. The credit card bills were the ones I had helped her manage when she confided that she was drowning in debt from her online shopping habits. As for rent money, I had been the one paying my own rent, plus helping with their mortgage payments for the past 6 months since Dad's early retirement had cut their income in half. I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding, I said, carefully trying to keep my voice steady. I've never borrowed money from any of you. In fact, I've been helping with expenses because I know things have been tight since Dad retired. There she goes again, Margaret said, turning to address Sarah and David as if I was not sitting right there. Making up stories, rewriting history to make herself look good. This is exactly what I was telling your cousins Linda and Mark about. Paula has this way of twisting everything to avoid taking responsibility for her choices. My heart sank even further. My cousins thought I was constantly asking for handouts. How was that possible when I had not spoken to them about money even once? I tried to catch Sarah's eye, hoping for some sign of support or understanding, but she continued staring at her plate with intense concentration. Maybe I should just go, I said quietly, placing my napkin beside my untouched plate. The pumpkin cheesecake I had worked so hard to perfect suddenly seemed ridiculous and naive. That might be for the best, Margaret replied coolly. Give you some time to think about how you want to move forward. We can't keep doing this dance forever, Paula. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling unsteady beneath me. As I walked toward the bathroom to collect myself, I could hear Margaret refilling her wine glass and making some comment about how I always ran away when confronted with the truth. The face staring back at me in the bathroom mirror looked pale and shocked, like someone who had just witnessed a terrible accident. In that moment, I made a decision that would change everything. Something had to be done about these lies, and I was the only person who could do it. When I returned to the dining room, I noticed my mother was no longer at the table. The sound of her voice drifted from the kitchen where she was apparently having a phone conversation. As I approached to refill my water glass, her words stopped me in my tracks like I had walked into an invisible wall. Beverly, you wouldn't believe the scene she made tonight, my mother was saying into her cell phone, presumably talking to my Aunt Beverly who lived in Milwaukee. We finally told Paula she needs to stop depending on us for everything. You should have seen her reaction. Pure drama, just like we predicted. I pressed myself against the kitchen door frame, my heart pounding so loudly I was afraid she might hear it. This conversation was revealing a reality I never could have imagined in my worst nightmares. I know. Margaret continued, her voice dropping to what she probably thought was a whisper. We've been enablers for way too long. Robert and I were talking about it last week. Maybe if we stop helping her out financially, she'll finally learn to be independent. Sometimes tough love is the only answer. I felt like the floor was crumbling beneath my feet. My mother was talking about me as if I was some kind of financial burden they had been carrying for years. But the truth was so completely opposite that I wondered if I was losing my mind. I was the one who had been quietly supporting them, not the other way around. The thing is, Beverly, we're thinking about making some changes to the family finances. Margaret went on, and I could hear her moving around the kitchen, probably looking for another bottle of wine. You know how Mom always said she wanted to divide everything equally among the kids, but maybe that's not the best idea anymore. Paula obviously can't handle money responsibly, so maybe we should consider redistributing her share to Sarah and David. They've got their heads on straight. The words hit me like ice water in my veins. They were talking about cutting me out of my grandmother's inheritance while she was still alive based on a completely false narrative about my financial situation. Worse yet, I realized my mother had been intercepting communications from my grandmother's estate attorney. Several times over the past few months, my grandmother had mentioned expecting important legal documents that never seemed to arrive. Right, exactly, Margaret was saying. If Paula can't manage her own finances, how can we trust her with any kind of inheritance? It would just be enabling her further. I backed away from the kitchen entrance before she could discover me, eavesdropping, my mind racing with the implications of what I had just heard. When I returned to the dining room, Margaret appeared a few moments later with a fresh bottle of wine and what looked like renewed energy for her attack on my character. I hope you've had time to think about what we discussed. she said, settling back into her chair and immediately refilling her glass. Because I have more to say. Mom, please. Sarah finally spoke up, but her words carried no real conviction. Maybe we could talk about this after dinner. No, Sarah, your sister needs to hear this, Margaret said firmly. We've been tiptoeing around the truth for too long, and it's not helping anyone. She turned back to me with eyes that seemed to burn with resentment I had never seen before. Paula, over the years, this family has given you everything. We paid for your college textbooks. We helped with your apartment deposit. We've covered your car insurance more times than I can count. And what do we get in return? You show up here acting like you're doing us a favor. Each accusation was like a knife twisting in my chest because every single one was backwards. I had paid for my own textbooks by working 20 hours a week at the campus library. My apartment deposit had come from my summer job at an accounting firm. As for car insurance, I had been paying my own policy since I was 19, and I had actually added my parents to my family discount plan to help them save money on their premiums. David, Margaret continued, turning to my youngest brother. Tell Paula about the conversation we had last week, about how you think she could benefit from some financial counseling. David's face turned red as he shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I just thought, maybe if you moved back home for a while, you could save up some money and get back on your feet. Get back on my feet, I repeated, staring at him in disbelief. David, I paid your emergency room bill 2 months ago. $5,800. Your insurance denied the claim and you called me crying because you couldn't afford it. That was different, David mumbled, still not making eye contact. That was an emergency. And the time before that, when you needed help with your rent? I pressed on. And the time before that, when your car broke down? Paula, stop trying to make everything about you, Margaret interrupted sharply. This is exactly what we're talking about. You twist every situation to make yourself look like the victim or the hero. It's exhausting. My father finally cleared his throat and spoke up, though his voice was barely audible. Maybe Paula's right about some of this. I thought she was struggling financially because that's what you told me, Margaret. But now I'm wondering if there's been some kind of miscommunication. Robert, don't let her manipulate you, Margaret snapped. You know exactly what's been going on. You've seen the bills, you've seen how she operates. I stood up again, feeling like I needed fresh air before I completely lost my composure. As I stepped onto the back porch, I ran into our longtime neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, who was returning from her evening walk with her golden retriever. Paula's sweetheart, she called out warmly. How wonderful to see you. Your mother was just telling me last week how proud she is of your big promotion at that fancy financial firm. She said you're making more money than everyone in the family combined. I stared at Mrs. Patterson, feeling like I was trapped in some kind of bizarre parallel dimension. My mother had been bragging about my success to the neighbors while simultaneously telling my family that I was a financial disaster who needed intervention. The contradiction was so stark and obvious that I finally began to understand I was dealing with something much more complex and disturbing than a simple misunderstanding. When I returned to the house, I found my mother standing by the hall table, where I had left my purse, rummaging through it with the casual confidence of someone who believed they had every right to invade my privacy. "What are you doing?" I demanded, my voice sharper than I intended. "Looking for antacids," Margaret replied without a hint of embarrassment. "My stomach is upset from all this drama." But as I approached, I could see she was not looking for medication. In her hands were several pieces of paper that had definitely not been in my purse when I arrived. Bank statements, legal documents, and what appeared to be correspondence from my grandmother's care facility were scattered across the table, like evidence at a crime scene. "Where did these come from?" I asked, snatching the papers from her hands. As I examined them more closely, my blood turned to ice in my veins. These were documents related to my grandmother's finances, and several of them bore signatures that looked like mine, but definitely were not written by my hand. "Margaret, what is this?" I held up a payment authorization form for my grandmother's assisted living facility. The signature read Paula Morrison in handwriting that was close to mine but unmistakably different in several key ways. "I don't know what you're talking about," my mother said, but her face had gone pale and her eyes were darting around the room like a cornered animal looking for an escape route. My phone buzzed with a text message, and I glanced down to see an urgent notification from First National Bank, where my grandmother's account was held. "Ms. Morrison, please contact us immediately regarding suspicious activity on account ending in 4782. Multiple unauthorized withdrawals require your immediate attention." I felt like I was falling through space as the pieces of a horrific puzzle began clicking into place. "Mom, have you been signing my name on Grandma's financial documents?" "I was protecting the family," Margaret said, her voice rising to a defensive shout. "You don't understand how complicated these things can get. Someone had to take charge and make sure everything was handled properly." "Take charge." I scrolled through more messages on my phone, finding 3 voicemails from the bank and 2 from my grandmother's attorney that I had somehow missed. "Margaret, what did you do?" By this time, my father and siblings had gathered in the hallway, drawn by the sound of raised voices. Sarah looked frightened, David appeared confused, and my father wore an expression of resignation that suggested he knew more about this situation than he had been letting on. "The bank shows withdrawals of $12,000 from Grandma's account over the past 6 months. I read from my phone as I listened to the voicemail messages. They say the person making the withdrawals claimed to be me and said I had a gambling addiction that required family intervention." "That's ridiculous," Margaret sputtered, but her face was now bright red and she was beginning to perspire despite the cool November evening. "Is it?" I pulled up my banking app and showed her the screen. "Because according to this, someone has been intercepting Grandma's Social Security deposits and cashing them at a check cashing place on Elm Street. Someone who told them she was Paula Morrison and showed them identification." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the living room and the sound of distant traffic on the main road. Margaret seemed to shrink before my eyes, her aggressive posture crumbling into something that looked more like panic. "Mom, what's going on?" Sarah asked in a voice barely above a whisper. "I was trying to protect everyone," Margaret said, tears beginning to stream down her face. "You don't understand how bad things have gotten. Robert lost $40,000 in those stupid cryptocurrency investments, and I've been trying to keep us from losing the house. I thought if I could just borrow some money from Mom's account temporarily, I could pay it back before anyone noticed." Borrow. I felt anger rising in my chest like a physical force. "You've been stealing from your own mother and forging my signature to cover it up." "It's not stealing when it's family money," Margaret protested weakly. "That money is going to be ours anyway when Mom passes away. I was just accessing it a little early to deal with an emergency." "An emergency that you created by lying to everyone about my financial situation?" I said, my voice shaking with rage. "An emergency that you've been making worse by pushing away the one person in this family who's actually been trying to help." David looked back and forth between me and our mother with growing comprehension. "Wait, are you saying Paula's been giving us money, not the other way around?" "She paid for your hospital bill," I said, pointing at him. "She's been covering the mortgage payments since Dad retired. She paid for Mom's car repair and Sarah's wedding decorations. She's been keeping this family afloat while being accused of being a financial burden." My father sank into a chair by the hall table, his face gray, with what looked like shame and exhaustion. "I knew money was disappearing from Mom's account," he admitted in a voice so quiet we all had to lean in to hear him. "But Margaret convinced me that Paula was taking it. She said Paula had developed a gambling problem and we needed to stage an intervention." "Robert, don't," Margaret pleaded, but the dam had already broken. "She showed me fake credit card bills with Paula's name on them." He continued, tears beginning to flow down his weathered cheeks. "She said Paula was too proud to ask for help directly, so she was stealing from Mom instead. I wanted to confront you, Paula, but Margaret said it would be better to handle it as a family. I stared at my mother, feeling something break inside my chest that I was not sure would ever heal properly. "You've been destroying my reputation with my own family to cover up your theft from Grandma. I was going to pay it back," Margaret said desperately. "I just needed a little time to figure things out. You have to understand, Paula, we were going to lose everything. The house, our retirement savings, everything your father and I worked for our whole lives. So you decided to steal from a 92-year-old woman with dementia and blame it on me," I said, grabbing my purse and coat from the closet. "Well, congratulations, Mom. You've officially destroyed this family." "Where are you going?" Sarah called out as I headed for the door. I turned back to look at them one final time, these people who had raised me and loved me and apparently been willing to sacrifice my reputation to save themselves from the consequences of their own poor decisions. "I'm going to call the police," I said simply, "and then I'm going to figure out how to protect Grandma from her own daughter." The sound of my mother's sobbing followed me out into the cold November night. I sat in my car in the driveway for exactly 10 minutes, giving myself time to think clearly before taking any action that could not be undone. During those 10 minutes, I made 3 phone calls that would change everything for my family. The first call was to my grandmother's estate attorney, James Morrison, who, despite sharing my last name, was not related to our family. I'd been working with him for the past 3 months after my grandmother mentioned some confusion about her financial accounts. "Mr. Morrison, this is Paula. I need to let you know that we have a situation." "Paula, thank you for calling," he replied, his voice immediately shifting to a more serious tone. "I was just about to contact you. We've received some concerning reports from the bank about account irregularities." "I know. I'm dealing with it right now. But there's something I need to tell you. I've been recording conversations with my family on your advice, and I think we have enough evidence to proceed with the protection measures we discussed." When I returned to the house, I was carrying a black leather briefcase that I had retrieved from my car's trunk. My family was still gathered in the hallway, looking like survivors of some natural disaster, trying to figure out what to do next. "We need to talk," I announced, walking past them into the living room where I could spread documents out on the coffee table. "All of us, right now." I opened the briefcase and began removing file folders, each one labeled with dates and names. My family slowly gathered around me, their faces reflecting various combinations of confusion, fear, and curiosity. For the past 3 months, I've been working with an elder law attorney. I began, my voice steady and calm, despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Grandma called me in August and said she was confused about some money that seemed to be missing from her account. At first, I thought it might be related to her memory issues, but she insisted something was wrong." Margaret had gone very quiet and was staring at the floor with intense concentration. On the advice of the attorney, I installed a recording app on my phone and began documenting all conversations related to Grandma's finances. I pulled out my phone and held it up so everyone could see it clearly, including the conversation we just had where Mom admitted to forging my signature and stealing from Grandma's account. The color drained completely from Margaret's face as she realized the full implications of what I was saying. 3 months ago, I also contacted Adult Protective Services to report potential elder abuse. I continued removing another folder from the briefcase. They've been conducting a quiet investigation, and the evidence we've gathered tonight will be very helpful to their case. "Paula, you called the authorities on your own family." Sarah asked, her voice filled with shock and something that might have been betrayal. "I called the authorities to protect my grandmother from theft and exploitation," I corrected her firmly. "The fact that the perpetrator is my own mother doesn't change my obligation to keep Grandma safe." I opened another folder and began spreading out financial documents across the coffee table. Bank statements, payment records, and transfer confirmations painted a clear picture of money flowing in one direction. "This is a complete record of every payment I've made to this family over the past 3 years," I explained, pointing to different sections of the documentation. Dad's medication costs when his insurance lapsed $4,200. Mom's therapy sessions that she said insurance wouldn't cover $3,600. David's car repairs medical bills and credit card payments, $11,400. Sarah's wedding expenses that somehow weren't covered by your budget, $7,800. David was staring at the documents with his mouth open. I had no idea it was that much. The total amount is $47,300, I continued. Money that I provided to help family members who I believed were struggling financially. Money that I gave freely without expecting repayment because I love you and wanted to help. I pulled out another set of documents and placed them next to the first stack. This is the timeline of Mom's theft from Grandma's account, cross-referenced with the stories she told you about my supposed financial irresponsibility. Every time she took money from Grandma, she created a new crisis story about me to justify why the family needed to cut me off financially. Robert was shaking his head slowly as if he could not quite process what he was seeing. Margaret, how did we get here? I was trying to save the family, Margaret whispered, but her voice carried no conviction anymore. No, you were trying to save yourself, I corrected, and you were willing to destroy my relationship with everyone I love to do it. I reached for my phone and pulled up a text message thread. Here's a message from Grandma yesterday thanking me for transferring her to the new assisted living facility near my apartment. She's not confused about her finances, Mom. She knows exactly what's been happening, and she asked me to protect her from you. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Margaret crying and the distant hum of traffic outside. So what happens now? David asked quietly. I closed the briefcase and stood up feeling older than my 28 years, but also stronger than I had ever felt before. Now you have 72 hours to begin making restitution payments for the money that was stolen, or I proceed with pressing criminal charges. Criminal charges, Sarah gasped. Elder abuse, fraud, identity theft, and forgery are all felonies in Illinois. I explained matter-of-factly. The prosecutor's office has already reviewed the evidence and is prepared to move forward with the case if the family cannot reach a satisfactory resolution. I handed Margaret a business card from my briefcase. This is a family financial counselor who specializes in crisis intervention. If you want to avoid prison time, I suggest you call her first thing Monday morning. As I headed toward the door for what I knew would be the final time, I turned back to address my family one last time. You wanted me to stop relying on the family, I said, echoing the words that had started this entire confrontation. Congratulations, you got your wish. I paused at the threshold of the front door, my hand on the brass doorknob that I had turned thousands of times throughout my childhood. There was still one more revelation that would complete their understanding of just how thoroughly their world was about to change. Actually, there's something else you need to see, I said, turning back to face my family one final time. I pulled my tablet from the briefcase and opened a spreadsheet that I had spent weeks preparing with my attorney. This is a comprehensive analysis of your actual financial situation, without my support. I announced setting the device on the coffee table where everyone could see the screen clearly. The numbers were stark and undeniable, laid out in neat columns that told a story of complete financial dependence. Margaret lifted her head to look at the screen and her face went completely white as she processed what she was seeing. Your mortgage payment is $2,400 per month, I read from the spreadsheet. I've been covering $1,200 of that since Dad's retirement. Your household expenses average $3,100 monthly. Dad's retirement income covers approximately $2,000 of that. The difference has been coming from me. David moved closer to look at the numbers, his expression shifting from confusion to dawning comprehension. We're basically bankrupt without Paula's help. The math is simple, I continued. Without my financial contribution, you'll be short approximately $2,300 every month. The bank has been notified that my automatic transfers will cease as of tomorrow morning. Robert finally spoke up, his voice hoarse with emotion. What about the house? The mortgage company will begin foreclosure proceedings approximately 90 days after your first missed payment, I replied without sentiment. Unless, of course, you can find alternative sources of income or significantly reduce your expenses. I opened another screen on the tablet showing a detailed timeline that stretched out over the next 6 months. I've already secured alternative arrangements for Grandma's care. I announced, watching Margaret's face carefully for her reaction. She'll be moving to Sunshine Manor next week, the premium facility 15 minutes from my apartment. Her remaining assets will be protected in a trust that prevents any further unauthorized access. What about visiting her? Sarah asked, tears beginning to flow down her cheeks. Supervised visits only arranged through me, I replied, at least until Mom completes a court-mandated rehabilitation program and makes full restitution for the stolen funds. I could see Margaret processing the full scope of how completely her world was about to change. Not only would she lose her primary source of income, but she would also lose access to the mother she had been exploiting for months. "Paula, please," Robert said, his voice breaking. "Isn't there some way we can work this out as a family? Some kind of payment plan or arrangement that doesn't involve the courts?" I considered his question, carefully studying the faces of these people who had raised me and shaped me and ultimately betrayed me in the most fundamental way possible. "There is one option," I said slowly. "Complete financial transparency. Every account, every debt, every income source gets reviewed by a certified financial planner. Mom enters a residential treatment program for gambling addiction and alcoholism. Dad finds employment or creates a realistic budget based on retirement income alone. And everyone commits to family therapy for a minimum of 1 year." "And if we do all that," David asked hopefully, "then I'll consider maintaining limited contact and possibly providing emergency assistance in the future," I replied. "But the days of me subsidizing your lifestyle while being treated like a charity case are over permanently." Margaret suddenly stood up, swaying slightly from the wine she had consumed throughout the evening. "This is ridiculous," she declared, her voice taking on the same aggressive tone she had used at dinner. "You're being completely unreasonable, Paula. Families help each other. That's what families do." "You're right, Mom," I agreed quietly. "Families do help each other. They don't steal from each other and then lie about it. They don't forge each other's signatures or try to destroy each other's reputations to cover up their crimes." "I never meant for things to go this far," Margaret said, tears streaming down her face. "I just got in over my head and I didn't know how to fix it." "The time for apologies was before you decided to make me the villain in your story," I replied. "Now the only thing that matters is what you do next." I closed the tablet and placed it back in my briefcase, signaling that our conversation was coming to an end. "Sarah, David, Dad," I said, addressing my siblings and father directly, "you have a choice to make. You can continue enabling Mom's destructive behavior, or you can choose to be part of a healthy family recovery process, but you can't do both." Sarah stepped forward, her face streaked with tears, but her voice steady. "What if we want to maintain a relationship with you, but we're not ready to cut Mom out of our lives completely? Then you'll need to do it without my financial support and without involving me in family decisions," I replied honestly. "I can't continue to enable a system that allows one person to manipulate and exploit everyone else." I picked up my briefcase and headed once again toward the door. This time I did not hesitate or look back. As I reached for the doorknob, I heard my father's voice behind me. "Paula, wait." I turned to see him standing in the doorway between the living room and the hallway, his shoulders squared and his expression more determined than I had seen in years. "Your mother is going to get the help she needs," he said firmly, "and I'm going to figure out how to support this family without putting that burden on you. You have my word." I nodded once, acknowledging his commitment without making any promises of my own. "I hope that's true, Dad, for everyone's sake." As I walked out into the cold November night, I heard the sound of my grandmother's voice calling my name. She was sitting in the passenger seat of a care facility van that was parked in the driveway, having arrived just in time to witness the final confrontation between her daughter and granddaughter. "Paula, sweetheart," she called out through the open window, "are you ready to take me home?" 6 weeks later, I was sitting in the conference room of Morrison and Associates law firm, surrounded by documents that would finalize the most difficult decision I had ever made in my 28 years of life. Across the mahogany table sat my grandmother, her lawyer, James Morrison, a court-appointed advocate and a stenographer who was recording every word of our conversation. "Are you absolutely certain about this decision, Mrs. Eleanor Morrison?" James asked my grandmother, his voice gentle but professional. "This action will have permanent consequences for your family relationships." My grandmother, who despite her 92 years had never been sharper or more determined, looked directly at me before responding. "Mr. Morrison, my granddaughter Paula has demonstrated the kind of integrity and responsibility that I hope to see in all of my children. Unfortunately, my daughter Margaret has proven that she cannot be trusted with financial responsibility or family loyalty." The document she was about to sign would remove Margaret completely from her will, transferring her inheritance to a trust fund that would provide for Paula's future children's education and my grandmother's long-term care needs. "Grandma, are you sure this is what you want?" I asked, giving her one final opportunity to reconsider. "This will permanently change your relationship with Mom." "Paula, my relationship with Margaret was permanently changed the moment she decided to steal from me and blame you for it," my grandmother replied with the clear voice of someone who had thought through every aspect of this decision. "Some actions have consequences that cannot be undone." She signed the document with a steady hand, her signature as firm and decisive as her words. The lawyer notarized the change, immediately making it legally binding and irreversible. "There's one more matter to address," James Morrison said, opening another file folder. "The restitution agreement." Over the past 6 weeks, my mother had made exactly 2 payments toward the $12,000 she owed to my grandmother's account. Each payment had been for $50, which meant she would need approximately 10 years to repay the full amount at her current rate. "Mrs. Margaret Morrison has failed to meet the terms of the repayment schedule established by the court," the lawyer continued. "She has also failed to complete the required rehabilitation program or family counseling sessions." "What does that mean for the criminal charges?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "The prosecutor's office will be moving forward with formal charges next week," he replied matter-of-factly. "Elder abuse fraud and identity theft charges carry potential sentences of 3 to 7 years in state prison." My grandmother reached across the table and placed her weathered hand over mine. "I know this is difficult for you, sweetheart, but sometimes the people we love make choices that force us to choose between enabling their destruction or protecting ourselves and others from their behavior." "I keep thinking about whether there was something else I could have done," I admitted. "Some way to help her without it coming to this." "You offered her multiple opportunities to make things right," James Morrison reminded me. "She chose to continue lying and manipulating rather than accepting responsibility for her actions. That's not your failure, Paula. That's hers." 3 hours later, I was back in my apartment staring out the window at the Chicago skyline and thinking about how dramatically my life had changed since that terrible Thanksgiving dinner. My phone buzzed with a text message, and I was surprised to see it was from my father. "Paula, I wanted you to know that I filed for divorce yesterday. I can't continue to enable Margaret's behavior, and I can't rebuild my life while she continues to refuse help. Would you be willing to meet for coffee sometime? I understand if the answer is no, but I'm hoping we can start to repair our relationship." I stared at the message for a long time before responding. "Dad, I think that would be good. But I want you to know that any relationship we rebuild has to be based on honesty and mutual respect. I can't go back to being the family's financial safety net." "I understand completely," he replied. "I found a job at the hardware store downtown, and I'm working with a debt counselor to figure out how to manage on my own income. I don't want anything from you except the chance to be a better father than I've been." That evening, I received an even more surprising communication. A handwritten letter had been delivered to my apartment postmarked from the county jail where my mother was being held pending her arraignment. "Paula, The letter began in my mother's familiar handwriting. I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, and I'm not writing this letter to make excuses for what I did. I'm writing because I need you to know that I finally understand how badly I hurt you and how wrong I was about everything. The letter went on for 3 pages detailing my mother's struggles with alcohol and gambling that had started years before I realized there was a problem. She explained how her debts had spiraled out of control after my father's early retirement and how desperation had led her to make increasingly destructive choices. I convinced myself that you owed us something because we raised you and loved you, she wrote. But the truth is, you were the only one in this family who was acting out of love. You were helping us because you wanted to help, and I turned that generosity into something ugly because I couldn't face my own failures. The letter concluded with something that surprised me more than anything else she had written. I'm going to plead guilty to all charges and accept whatever sentence the court gives me. I'm also going to complete the rehabilitation program while I'm incarcerated, not because it will reduce my sentence, but because I need to become someone worthy of being your mother again. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope that someday I can prove to you that I'm capable of being better. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my desk drawer, unsure how I felt about this apparent transformation in my mother's perspective. Time would tell whether her words reflected genuine change or simply another attempt at manipulation. 2 weeks later, I received a call that would provide me with my answer. My father's voice was shaking as he delivered the news. Paula, your mother, requested a meeting with the prosecutor today. She provided them with complete documentation of additional thefts that she hadn't previously disclosed. It turns out she took almost $18,000, not $12,000. She also gave them information about check fraud that could have resulted in additional charges. Why would she do that? I asked, genuinely confused. Because she said she was tired of lying and wanted to make sure every penny was accounted for so that full restitution could be made, my father replied. The prosecutor said it was the first time in his career that someone had voluntarily increased their own criminal exposure to ensure complete honesty. Perhaps my mother really was capable of change after all. 18 months later, I was standing in the kitchen of my new house in Denver, Colorado, preparing dinner for a very different kind of family gathering. Through the large windows, I could see the Rocky Mountains painted gold and purple by the setting sun, a view that never failed to remind me how far I had traveled from that terrible Thanksgiving dinner in suburban Chicago. My grandmother was sitting at the kitchen island carefully arranging flowers in a vase that she had brought as a housewarming gift. At 93, she was more vibrant and peaceful than I had seen her in years. The stress of worrying about her finances and dealing with my mother's manipulation had lifted from her shoulders like a physical weight she no longer had to carry. "Paula dear, this house is absolutely perfect," she said, examining the open floor plan and modern fixtures with obvious approval. "I can see why you fell in love with it. The best part is that I bought it with money I saved by not supporting other people's poor financial decisions," I replied with a smile that held only a trace of lingering sadness. The doorbell rang and I opened it to find my father standing on the front porch with a bouquet of flowers and a nervous expression that reminded me of a teenage boy on his first date. "Hi, Dad," I said, stepping aside to let him enter. "How was your flight?" "Long but good," he replied, looking around my home with obvious pride. "Paula, this place is beautiful. You've really built something wonderful here." Over the past year and a half, my father and I had slowly rebuilt our relationship through monthly video calls and quarterly visits. He had kept his promise to find employment and manage his finances independently. More importantly, he had kept his promise to prioritize honesty over comfort in our conversations. "How's the hardware store treating you?" I asked as we walked toward the kitchen. "Better than I expected," he admitted. "Turns out there's something satisfying about helping people fix things instead of just watching them fall apart." My phone buzzed with a video call from my siblings who were joining us virtually for this family dinner. Sarah's face appeared on the screen first, followed by David's. Both of them looked healthier and happier than they had during those dark months following our family crisis. "Hey, Paula," Sarah called out cheerfully. "How's life in the mountains?" "Pretty amazing," I replied honestly. "How are things going with your new job?" Sarah had used the family crisis as motivation to finally pursue her master's degree in social work. She was now working at a non-profit organization that helped families in financial crisis, a career choice that felt like it had grown directly from her experience watching our family fall apart and rebuild itself. "I love it," she said with obvious sincerity. "Every day I work with families who are struggling with the same kinds of issues we went through. It feels like I'm turning our pain into something useful." David had taken a different path, but one that was equally positive. He had used the shock of discovering how much financial support he had been receiving from me as motivation to completely restructure his approach to money and work. "I got promoted to shift supervisor," he announced proudly, "and I just made my final payment on all those medical bills. I'm officially debt-free for the first time since college." "That's incredible, David," I said, feeling genuine pride in his accomplishment. "How does it feel?" "Like I can finally breathe," he admitted. I had no idea how much stress I was carrying about money until I started handling it responsibly. As we gathered around my dining room table, sharing a meal that had been prepared and paid for without drama or hidden agendas, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed since that catastrophic holiday dinner. The most significant change was in my relationship with my mother. 3 months earlier, Margaret had been released from the minimum security prison where she had served 14 months of her 2-year sentence. Her early release was due to exemplary behavior and completion of multiple rehabilitation programs. "Has anyone talked to Mom recently?" Sarah asked as if she had been reading my thoughts. "I got a letter from her last week," my father replied carefully. "She's doing well in the halfway house program. She's working at a grocery store and attending AA meetings twice a week. She asked me to tell you all that she's proud of how everyone has rebuilt their lives." "Does she want to reconnect with us?" David asked. "She says she wants to earn the right to reconnect," my father corrected. "She's not asking for anything from anyone. She's just focused on becoming someone worthy of having a family again." I had wrestled with my feelings about my mother's transformation for months. The letters she sent from prison had shown a level of self-awareness and accountability that I had never seen from her before. But I had learned the hard way that people can say anything when they need something, and I was not ready to risk another betrayal. I think about her every day. I admitted to my family. I hope she's genuinely changing, but I also know that I can't base my decisions on hope anymore. I have to base them on demonstrated behavior over time. "That seems wise," my grandmother said quietly. "Love doesn't mean accepting destructive behavior. Sometimes love means setting boundaries that protect everyone involved." After dinner, as my father and grandmother were settling into the guest rooms I had prepared for their visit, I found myself standing on my back deck, looking up at stars that were brilliantly visible in the clear mountain air. My phone rang and I was surprised to see an unfamiliar local number on the screen. "Hello, is this Paula Morrison?" asked a warm female voice. "Yes, this is Paula." "My name is Janet Chen and I'm a caseworker with the state of Colorado. I'm calling because we have a situation where we think you might be able to help." "What kind of situation?" "We're working with an elderly woman whose daughter has been financially exploiting her. The family dynamics are very similar to a case I read about in Illinois, where you helped protect your grandmother from similar abuse. Would you be willing to talk with this family about how you navigated that situations?" I smiled as I realized how perfectly this opportunity fit with the new direction my life had taken. "I'd be happy to help. When would you like to meet?" As I ended the call and continued looking up at the stars, I thought about the journey that had brought me from that horrible Thanksgiving dinner to this peaceful evening in my own home, surrounded by family members who loved and respected me enough to be honest with me. The most important lesson I had learned was that enabling someone's destructive behavior is not the same thing as loving them. Real love sometimes requires setting boundaries that force people to confront the consequences of their choices. It requires choosing truth over comfort and growth over stability. I had also learned that it's possible to forgive someone without trusting them to love someone, without enabling them, and to maintain relationships without sacrificing your own well-being. My family had been broken by lies, manipulation, and financial abuse, but from those broken pieces, we had built something stronger and more honest. Not everyone had chosen to be part of that rebuilding process, and that was okay too. Sometimes the healthiest choice is to let people face the natural consequences of their actions, while focusing your energy on creating positive relationships with people who share your values. As I prepared to go back inside to spend the evening with family members who had earned their place in my life through honesty and mutual respect, I realized that I had finally learned the difference between helping and enabling, between family loyalty and self-destruction. The stars shining down on the Colorado mountains seemed to approve of the choices I had made and the life I was building. For the first time in years, I felt completely at peace with my decisions and completely hopeful about my future. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is to refuse to participate in their dysfunction. Sometimes walking away is the only way to create space for healing and growth. And sometimes the family you build through conscious choices is stronger than the family you were born into. I learned that I could love my mother without financing her mistakes, support my siblings without enabling their irresponsibility, and honor my family without sacrificing my own integrity. The greatest gift I gave my family was not my money or my silence about their problems. The greatest gift I gave them was the opportunity to learn how to take care of themselves and each other without relying on manipulation or exploitation. And the greatest gift I gave myself was learning that I deserved relationships based on honesty, respect, and genuine care rather than guilt, obligation, and financial dependency. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you had to choose between keeping peace in your family and protecting yourself from financial or emotional abuse? How did you handle setting boundaries with people you love when their behavior became destructive? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and share it with someone who might need to hear this message. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about finding strength in difficult family situations and learning to build healthy relationships based on mutual respect. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it gives you courage to make whatever difficult decisions you might be facing in your own life. Remember, sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable destructive behavior, even when that means walking away from people you care about.